And this session will be filled with interventions from NGOs, media, civil society. And it's just like this: you raise your hand and you'll get the floor. Whereby I do insist that you introduce yourself so that we know who you are and why. And the delegations will have the opportunity to listen to this. And I think that is a highly necessary exercise for governments to hear civil society, media, NGOs on the situation that we have here in this conference, the situation about volatile environments. Please, I would like to see hands. First hand is to our right. So tell us please who you are. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Oh, one second, before you start. 2 minutes,
2 minutes
is the maximum. After 3 minutes, I get irritated.
Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Nina Jankovic, and for the past 10 months, I have been a Fulbright Clinton Public Policy Fellow researching disinformation, in particular Russian disinformation in Ukraine. And in my research, when I describe the crisis that has erupted over the past several years, I prefer to use the term disinformation rather than fake news, information war, propaganda, any of the other terms that we've heard over the past 2 days. Why? Because disinformation does not just encompass fake news stories, doctored photographs, or coordinated social media campaigns. It is any activity that sows distrust, doubt, or discontent. And with this in mind, let me say something that I hope many of us here have been thinking over the past 2 days, and that is that much of the commentary that we've heard from Russian government officials, media, and so-called civil society organizations is part of Russia's robust and long-running disinformation campaign. We've all come here to Vienna in hope of a dialogue about issues that ought to be universally important to everyone here. But these organizations, these individuals have come here with eloquently prepared statements that question the very purpose of this conference. There is no crisis of freedom of the media in Crimea, they tell us. That Russia has not targeted journalists for their work exposing the Kremlin's destructive behavior. And fake news, well, our colleagues from Russia are not sure that it exists and think we need to define it more concretely before we talk about solving the problem. Well, if there's no crisis of the media or any other freedoms in Crimea, why then does the Russian government block international organizations, including the very body that sponsored this conference, from mounting an international monitoring mission to the peninsula? And if journalists are not targeted, why do they keep disappearing? And as for a definition of fake news, I can tell you from personal experience that I've read countless definitions over the course of my own research, and they all coalesce around one idea. Russia is behind much of the fake news campaigning we've witnessed over the past several years. So perhaps the problem isn't that we lack a definition, but that Russia finds the agreed upon definition inconvenient. That being said, I hope that leaving here today, participants have not let this disinformation-saturated debate change their commitment to combating the problem, both in their home countries and in the OSCE region at large. Thank you.
That was a statement. It just makes me think that perhaps a small right of reply from certain participating states will be desired at some point of time in this discussion. So yes, delegations will have a possibility to take their right of reply, as you just have asked, sir. Yeah? But later, if you don't mind. Huh? What was the first arm here now? I think it was you, but I'm not sure.
Добрый день.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. I was the head of the editor-in-chief of the largest Russian newspaper. My name is Gusenov, and I'm now the secretary of the Federation of Journalists of Russia. First, I'd like to express my thanks to the OSCE for the possibility to meet my Ukrainian colleagues and discuss with them critical aspects of our relations and the situation of mass media in Russia and Ukraine. I agree with the previous speaker that unfortunately the spirit of confrontation has been dominating our conference during the last 2 days. However, this does not prevent us from quietly and in a normal fashion present our arguments. I would like to say that we are not going to impose our friendship on anybody. We are proud of our friendship with Ukrainian journalists. We have many such friends in Odessa, in Donetsk, in Lugansk, etc. Those are citizens of your country, but they're also our friends, and we are going to defend us with all means at our disposal in our legislation and through other resources. I think that in recent times, unfortunately, politics has invaded routine journalistic work. And this, of course, will do nothing to improve our relations. The Ukrainian delegation has now established the origin of journalists and has determined where they come from. I think that's a very strange approach. We know that Radio Liberty is financed by the State Department of the United States, and so we are asking what kind of relationship do they have to Ukraine? Ukraine now has acquired new friends, and those friends are located in areas that are fairly far away from Ukraine. I personally, I'm worried about the participation of Ukrainian media in promoting a fascist tendency in the media landscape. For example, also political leaders of Austria, or if this happened in Austria, where we are hosted now, or in Germany, this would already have led to a prison sentence. By the way, on the topic of tolerance, of course, Russian journalists defend various points of view, differing points of view. For example, I do not support statements with regard to Russian journalists who have gone missing in Donbass, because we don't have the corresponding data yet, and that's why I find it inadequate to give a statement on this topic. And at the same time, I'd like to mention that the Russian television, in spite of all its deficiencies, regularly gives a platform to Ukrainian journalists practically each and every day, whereas we don't see the same approach of tolerance on the part of Ukraine. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Barbara Bukovska. I'm the Senior Director for Law and Policy at Article 19, but I would like to make this statement on behalf of the coalition of NGOs working in the OSCE region. And it has been a great pleasure to explore the challenges to media freedom in volatile environment, the OSCE. And I would like to suggest that one of the good instruments and resource for addressing the issues we are discussing here today and yesterday is actually the representative on media freedom in the OSCE region. And I would like to make in the statement urge the Permanent Council of the OSCE to appoint a new mandate holder as soon as possible without any further delays. We are extremely concerned that this mandate has not been filled since the departure of Mrs. Dunja Mijatovic in March this year and remains unfilled. And issues we have discussed over the last 2 days can be greatly addressed by the representative through its early warning mechanisms, through rapid responses to serious non-compliance issued with regard to freedom of the media and freedom of expression, and also for observing and on media developments in the participating states and promoting the full compliance with the OSCE principles. We are actually extremely concerned that the situation is quite unique. Since the inception of the mandate in 1998, there has not been any interruptions, and that successive representatives have helped to maintain the freedom of the media on the policy agenda within the OSCE, and they have made a considerable contribution to a number of initiatives related to press freedom and the issues discussed at this conference. And we believe that this was made possible by both the independence conferred on the office and the profile of the representatives who have shown determination, vision, and steadfastness in fulfilling their mandate. So the lack of the new appointment is a great concern to media and other stakeholders, and we urge the Permanent Council to ensure that this position is filled as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this message. Sir.
Andrei Sviridov.
Andrei Sviridov, journalist from the Kazakhstan International Bureau for Journalist Human Rights, and also a press activist for the past 20 years. I would like to mention the safety of journalists that was touched upon this morning, and also the topic fake news. A lot has been said already about fake news. Fake news are bad. We need to combat them. And how to fight against fake news? Well, we would be happy to fight against fake news in Kazakhstan. Article 272 of the criminal law has been passed, which bans the spread of false information and imposes a sentence of up to 20 years. Of course, I cannot be happy about the fact that there will be no more fake news, because for the duration of this year, only 2 people were convicted, one journalist, one person to 2 years, one person to 1.5 years, and 2 bloggers were convicted according to Article 72 of the criminal law of Kazakhstan. In both cases, the spread of false information has been cited as a criminal act, but in both cases there is only an assumption of such false facts and no proof, because apparently the journalist published news about bad construction, and the bank sued this journalist, and he was sentenced to 2.5 years. As far as the bloggers are concerned, there was a case about private property, and that, for example, Chinese citizens might buy up rural properties, agricultural properties, and this was also qualified as fake news, and the journalists and bloggers were sentenced to prison sentences. And of course, Article 272 also punishes incitement. And in 2015, already a conversation about religious or other topics can be punished and can be qualified by the prosecution as propaganda, as incitement to hate, etc., and as giving priority to one group in comparison to another can be qualified as discrimination and is punishable by 7 years in prison. As I already said, these articles of the criminal law are being combined, and of course journalists are also being sued on the grounds of damages. Lithuanian journalists and Ukrainian journalists are present here, who are members of the federation, and also our federation knows that the son of the director of an information agency was sentenced to 4 years because allegedly he had violated state rules when applying to a tender, whereas in reality he was just he fulfilled bridge building function between the state and the opposition. He was sentenced to a prison sentence. And also journalists of Tribuna, of the newspaper Tribuna, were sentenced to prison sentences, which means that criminal criminal funds of Mr. Ablazov have been acknowledged as being criminal, And newspaper reports about him were recognized as being as fake news, whereas Ablasov and his funds were recognized as being criminal only in recent times. And during the second week in prison, the journalist was tortured and he was blackmailed to give testimony and to admit his guilt. And that's why I can say that as far as safety is concerned, on 14th May, a member of the Journalist Federation went by train from Almaty to Astana, met the ambassadors of Germany and Lithuania. He had an appointment with them, and he was the member of the Committee on the Defense of Shambulatov Matulayev. He was criticized for this meeting, and in the end, he had to be rehabilitated. Now it turns out that when he was traveling on the train, in the steppe, he was attacked by two unknown individuals, and one of them said, "This is for Magnitsky," and the other said, the other attacked him with a knife. Why with Magnitsky? Because if this word is going to be used, then this is, of course, illustrative of the situation. And there was also an initiative. The chair interrupts. In 2012, there was also a case where a person was nicknamed Magnitsky, and that's why they called him Magnitsky. And there are other three bloggers who were sentenced for the criticism of Russian opposition material, for spreading opposition material, and others also because they criticized the government. I would like to express the wish that the OSCE representative on freedom of the media, and as soon as a new representative has been appointed, should issue a statement in defense of these people. Thank you.
A totally arbitrary way, I forgot to push the button on speaking time. Let's pray I will be a bit more regular from now on. And if not, correct me. Sir, you over there, you have the floor.
Sergei Gorbachev.
Microphone, please.
Sergei
Gorbachev, chair of the Russian Journalist Federation. Yesterday, I wanted to take the floor, but I wasn't able to. And because my name was mentioned here, I'd like to say that I'd like to say to Ms. Barbara Lukaszewska that I do have my own opinion, and to Mr. Yurchenko, I'd like to say that I have long-standing relations with Sevastopol, not only 2 or 3 years. I don't know how it is with you, but this is one of the areas where the remains of my ancestors are buried. And it doesn't matter what kind of citizenship I have. And also with Ukraine, I also have very much in common. My grandfather died on August 18th, 1943. He was buried in a mass grave on Ukrainian soil. Ukrainian soil, for me, is also very important and very close to my heart. With great regret, I have to say that this forum has been turned into a platform for the spread of political views on journalism, which is a degradation, a deterioration of the prestige of our organization. This means that our profession is an instrument of state policy in their countries. Unfortunately, the media landscape, media community is now undecided, and that's why we should now and in future always recall that if we are not the fourth power, then at least a community, a profession that is able to present alternative points of views to the points of view of the government. And that's why I would like to appeal to the participants of this forum to remain impartial. Yesterday I was promised 5 minutes, by the way. As far as other arguments are concerned, I never stated these arguments. There have been not only fake news but also lies. In Sevastopol, not a single journalist was killed, whereas hundreds of journalists had to leave Sevastopol, had to leave Crimea, among them many persons whose last names were not mentioned here. And that's why I'd like to call on the OSCE representatives to visit Crimea. We are prepared to provide an information platform to show what life is like from the inside. Recently, the head of the Center for Humanitarian Initiatives from the United States visited Sevastopol, and she acknowledged that mainstream media, due to certain circumstances, are not able to visit our city. I would like to invite you, please visit us at any time. We will organize your visit. We'll organize meetings with Crimean Tatars, but also with ordinary people. The people of Sevastopol will be glad to host you. Now, I'd like to also express my thanks to the chair, and I'd like to give you a small present, a collection of our photos. And I'd also like to give you a picture, a painting, where you will see a ship with lowered sails. And I hope that you will sail to Crimea. Thank you very much.
The lady over there has the floor. Yes.
Добрый вечер.
Good evening. Olga Musafirova. I am the correspondent of Novaya Gazeta in Ukraine. In reply to all those Russian journalists who have been asking the representative of the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who of the Russian mass media is officially accredited in Ukraine. I and Novaya Gazeta am accredited at the Verkhovna Rada. I have a press certificate, a press card, and I'm able to go to the combat zone. And also my colleagues who work in Moscow at Novaya Gazeta are also entitled to go to Ukraine. I think we were accredited because we respect the territorial integrity and the state sovereignty of Ukraine. We do not spread fake news. We do not spread propaganda. And we do not use incitement to hate and other pictures of the enemy. We have tried to be balanced in our information that we present to our readers, and we've been able to work on the territory of the temporarily occupied zones of Donbas, on the territory of the so-called DPR and LPR. As a result, we have presented material which, without any doubt, can form part of the evidence for the absence or presence of Russian troops in the Donbass. In particular, we were able to present evidence on who shot down the Malaysian Boeing MH17. We also interviewed Russian soldiers, servicemen, who came to perform their international duty in defense of the population of the Donbass, and who later were hospitalized. These servicemen gave an interview to Novaya Gazeta. And so I can say that our accreditation in 2015 was repealed. Our journalist, in 2015, our journalist, Mr. Kanyegin, was imprisoned 2 times because the leadership of the non-recognized republics gave him information which was not supposed to be published by Russian or other mass media. Unfortunately, now we have lost our possibility to work on the occupied territories. In conclusion, I'd like to mention the argument regarding the politicization of journalists' work in the zone of the anti-terror operation. I think every journalist who works in an honest fashion knows that the key to peace is in the Kremlin, not in Kiev. Thank you.
Yes, sir, your turn. Yes, please.
Добрый день.
Good afternoon. My name is Vasily Baldutin. I am, just like Ms. Safirova, a journalist of Novaya Gazeta, and am accredited in Ukraine. I've been working as a journalist for the past 30 years. I'm also a university professor of law. And that's why I am very close to the profession and also the situation. I'm also the secretary of the Federation of Journalists in Stavropol and also in Russia, in areas that are very close to the Ukrainian-Russian border. I have come here in order to broaden my horizon, to find out what my colleagues what kind of positions my colleagues have. And there's, we heard a new word here in Russian, non-friends, non-brothers. Well, we leave it to the conscience of the sponsors of this word, whether this is a real word or not. I have been a professor for many years. I'm also an editor-in-chief who has trained journalists, and that's why I always try to instill in them a feeling, an approach of skepticism, of criticism regarding facts that are being presented as obvious facts. Unfortunately, here at this conference, there are preconceived viewpoints and the absence of willingness to be convinced of the opposite. Gleb yesterday complained about Channel 1, about the Russian Channel 1. He said that he had been offended by this channel, according to instruction of somebody. It is true that sometimes we do not have a positive attitude towards our colleagues from the large state Russian TV channels. I'd like to also recall the famous story of the crucified boy. And what was this based on? Just the testimony of a woman, which was then just accepted as evidence and broadcast on TV. A true professional would have been obliged to bring evidence to the contrary. Anna Politkovskaya, Svetlana Alexievich were also called not critical, but nevertheless, we glorify them. We know that they're important. This just on the topic of fake news. And I'd like to say something else. There is always a mantra that is being repeated, that television governs the world. And I think this is a lie. I have quite a large circle of acquaintances in Russia and beyond. I've been traveling all over the world, and I can say that the myth of the power of TV is just a myth. My personal acquaintances are not subjected to the magic of TV, with the exception of maybe my 55-year-old father-in-law. Everybody else tries to get a diversified picture from various landscapes, media landscapes. We are all in front of the computer, in front of the internet, in order to get a more objective point of view.
The lady way back behind the cameraman at the other side of the table.
Yeah. Thank you for noting me. Tamar Genzurashvili, Media Development Foundation. First of all, I fully support the first speaker talking about propaganda challenges, and I suggest my colleagues to consider this issue beyond fake news in the context of hybrid war and information security, which requires involvement of stakeholders besides non-stakeholders. And the second issue is related to recent development in Georgia when kidnapping of Azeri journalist Afgan Mukhtarli took place. Despite the civil society protests, there is no answer from Georgian government how Azeri journalists cross the border. This is issue, and I think international organizations should call Georgian government to investigate this case properly. Thank you.
You surprised me by your conciseness. Sir, over there, if you are of the Russia delegation, I would kindly ask you to wait until all NGOs have spoken, and then I would like to turn to the delegations for their right of reply. Would you mind? Thank you very much. Where was number 9? That was you. Number 10 is you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, for giving me the floor. My name is Mirey Mukajan. I'm representing the delegation of Kazakhstan.
But I just asked the delegations to wait until all NGOs had the floor. And Russia just agreed to that. I find it difficult to give you the floor now. I'm sorry.
Sure, if you don't forget me, of course.
I will try not to forget you, but now we have spoken with each other. I'm sure I will.
Okay,
not.
I will wait then.
There is hope for you.
Okay, thank you.
There is hope. Yes, please.
Yeah, Alexei Mansuk.
Alexei Mansuka, Information Service of Donetsk. I would like to note the following. The statement of Nina is quite clear, and if you look at it objectively, if you look at our 2 days conference, it might seem that we still have a long path to dialogue. Why is that so? Because some journalists, in my opinion, are very much politicized in their work, and the slides that were shown by Mr. Gorbachev demonstrate mistakes in the work of journalists. I can confirm that as a journalist and as somebody who works and reports on a daily basis from the conflict zone. If these slides had been shown to the military forces of Donbas or of DPR or LPR or Kiev, they would have been criticized because they do not correspond to the norms of politically sensitive reporting from a conflict zone, which is something that we have to adhere to in Donbas. And this is exactly the important topic for journalists, that for long years it's been difficult to adhere to these principles, and we need to improve adherence to these principles when working from Donbas. I'd like to also express a practical recommendation for journalists. Journalists are confronted with enormous challenges nowadays. First of all, with disinformation. We could also use methods to verify information. We should not give the floor, not give a platform to Poroshenko or Putin. We should give a platform to the people who are affected on a daily basis by the conflict. We should give a voice to them, to the victims of the conflict. At the same time, journalists try to make the guilty party of these people, of the affected population. They try to stigmatize them. Radical organizations on both sides try to stigmatize them and make them feel guilty. They quote results of referenda, etc. And that's why I'd like to add that it is indispensable that the journalists and our community make an abstraction from politics. They need to focus on professionalism, and they need to depart from the point of view of our national governments, because a journalist is certainly not a mouthpiece of the government. It's an important profession. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sir, you over there.
Спасибо. Меня зовут Андрей.
Thank you, Andrei Dektarenko. I'm a journalist from Lugansk, and in spite of the fact that the secretary of the Russian Federation of Journalists said that Radio Liberty is an American organization, I'm now forced to work at Radio Liberty in Ukraine. Why? Because for the 4th year in a row, I cannot get back to my hometown, cannot get back to the graves of my ancestors. What is even worse, the situation in the occupied territories, especially in the area of freedom of the media, is terrible. In 2014, there were only 2 independent newspapers, and now there is only 1 which services the separatists. The same happened to the TV channels. They were bombed by the separatists. And in the end, Russian journalists helped the separatists to rebuild propaganda mouthpieces where only the official point of view can be spread. I'd like to add that the events in Donetsk and Lugansk and other occupied territories are a good illustration of the fact what happens when Russian media come and provide help to their friends. All opposition has been purged. We are talking about the fact that broadcasts about ordinary people cannot be shown. Their sufferings cannot be shown in TV. And the same applies to other official authorities. Because broadcasts that show an alternative point of view are then not shown, whereas at the same time on Russian TV, journalists are being questioned because they have been accused of espionage. Colleagues, my apologies, but when somebody tells you that you are not friends, don't forget that there are many who cannot even get to their hometown thanks to the media landscape that has been created. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sir, over there, you, yes. Oh, yeah, I think so, yes.
Меня зовут
Good afternoon.
You over there, sitting not so far from Natalia, to her right, you have the floor. I'm sorry not to be more precise than this, but Natalia is quite a clear beacon here.
Да.
Yes, you.
Да. Меня зовут
Andriy Shapovalov. I'm a journalist from Lugansk. I live and work in Lugansk, and I'm the head of the Federation of Journalists in Lugansk Oblast, which has now been established on Ukrainian territory. I have been living and working my whole life in Lugansk. I'd like to express my profound gratitude to the OSCE for giving us this platform. I think it is very adequate that our partners, our colleagues in the same profession can listen to us and can listen to points of view that are quite different from theirs. And I know that we are very far apart in our opinions, but we are still speaking to each other, whereas in the majority of cases, we don't really accept the other's point of view. We are talking about fake news. I myself was a witness of such an event, of such a case. I witnessed how false news about an attack were spread and were spread by a certain state, and these facts and the fact that this was fake news is already well known. Unfortunately, there is a disbalance here that we have been observing as far as the tone is concerned and certain phrases in order to deflect journalists from the substance of their work, whereas it would be their task to adhere to certain standards, to international law. Certain terms have been defined under international law. What is a terrorist? What is annexation? Which kind of territory can be called occupied, and what is the responsibility of an occupier regarding that territory? Talking about militia, inventing crucified boys and girls who've become a victim of rape and later on apologizing for that, that means a discreditation of the profession. It was here stated that TV has an influence only over a 55-year-old grandfather. I think we are not only talking about TV, but also about social networks. For example, Vkontakte, which has been banned in Ukraine because it was it caused widespread panic. This is also part of journalism or of journalist technology. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First, RT, please, and then you.
Thank you. My name is Paula Slee. I'm the Middle East Bureau Chief of RT of Russia Today. I'd like to start off by saying I take great offense to the comments that were made, particularly by the first speaker, that Russian journalists and Russian representatives are here in the spirit of confrontation and not for an open discussion. I'll have you know that this is maybe my 6th OSCE conference dealing with this topic, and at this very conference I approached Ukrainian journalists with the intention of talking, because after all this is a conference about us, it's a conference about journalists, and I'm open to that conversation, and many of my Russian colleagues are as well. That particular group of Ukrainian journalists turned their back on me and walked away. Now, it's not helpful when we sit in these kind of panels and these kind of forums, and the minute a Russian perspective is presented, people clap, or the minute I present myself as a Russian journalist, I'm perceived as being a propagandist. The minute you see me as a propagandist, we have nothing to talk about. And I don't feel safe that these conversations are going to protect me as a journalist, because many of you don't even see me as a legitimate journalist. With all due respect to the program organizers, there's not one person who spoke on an official panel representing a Russian point of view. Everybody was either Ukrainian or critical of Russia. So if we're talking about press freedom, and if we're being honest with ourselves about let's have all opinions heard, I think that's one of the first problems that needs to be countered. The issue of fake news came up a few times. This is something, of course, we take seriously. I can tell you at RT, we have our own fact-checking app. But how many of you know that no Russian organizations have been invited or have been included as part of the international fact-checking community? It's not because we don't want to be part of it, it's because you don't want us to be part of it. So let's be honest with ourselves and let's speak to each other and hear what each other has to say, because sometimes the conversation is we talk at each other. If I was talking with my South African accent and you thought I was working for South African television, you might listen to me. But the minute I introduce myself as working for a Russian news network, which I'm proud to work for, you close down and you don't hear what any of us have to say. Thank you.
This was also timing. Thank you very much. Yes, lady, please.
Many thanks. Natalia Skurto. I represent Transnistria of Moldova. I live and work in the area of a frozen conflict. I am a journalist, a freelance, and I'd like to call on all participants of this conference and also on the organizers to get back to a professional level from a political level, because the work of journalists on small territories, the work of journalists who have to live by double standards. On the one hand, they have to submit to the legislation of a non-recognized state. On the other hand, they also have to submit to the legislation of the recognized state and international law. These problems are very important, and that's why I'd like you to focus on the problem of journalists working in such regions. Whenever foreign journalists visit us, they come for 2 or 3 days, they'll have a look around and then they leave, whereas those who have to work there permanently have much more difficult working conditions. It is much more difficult for them to comply with standards, and they need to fear for their relatives. Thank you.
The sir in the white shirt, yes. You, yes, please.
Thank you very much. I am Seymur Kazımov, freelance journalist in Azerbaijan. I know this conference more related to Ukraine and Russian problems, but I would like to call your attention to my country because we have just international community and international audience to address our problems. I just want to give statistics what happened just months ago in my country. 2 journalists arrested, sentenced for 30 days. Despite of their time is over, they are still in prison. 1 journalist 4 days ago arrested for 7 years. More than 10 journalists have travel ban. They cannot visit conference, they cannot go outside of the country. Also, the Afghan Muhtarlı case, just my colleague from Georgia talked about, it is a really unique and unprecedented case. Approximately 3 weeks ago afternoon in the center of Tbilisi, this journalist kidnapped and turned over to Baku, to Azerbaijan authorities. But there is fake, how to say, charge against him as if he trespassing the state border of Azerbaijan and Georgia, as if he had 10,000 euros. He is a spy, he wanted to send this money to Azerbaijan opposition or something. Really, this is very, yes, this is very funny, and this is at the same time, this is not very funny because when we are talking here about politics, we are not paying attention to the problems of the media. The journalists, they are sitting in the prison. The time is past. Please let more act than talking. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this, Sergei. You have the floor. Yes.
Colleagues, thank you. I would like to, and my name is Sergei Bilayenko, the chair of the National Federation of Journalists in Ukraine. We heard the phrase that this conference is an expression of deterioration of the state of journalism. I think it would be better to note this fact, and just on the contrary, I would like to express my gratitude to the Office of the Representative on Freedom of Media for the opportunity to speak here and get a platform. And I'd like to call on each and every participant to recognize that deep in our heart, we know who we are, why we came here, what kind of task and aim we set ourselves, what kind of fears we have, whether we came here to be diplomats to our country, whether we came here to defend the position of our country, or whether we came here as true journalists. As a Ukrainian journalist and as a member of the Ukrainian Federation, I think we are accountable also for the safety of journalists, and that's why we strongly support this conference and the very difficult project of a dialogue between the Russian and the Ukrainian federations of journalists, because we have been aware that your efforts, the efforts of the representative on freedom of media, promote safety of journalists. And I'd also like to address the diplomats and representatives of all states to appoint a representative on the freedom of the media as soon as possible, because this person will be a great friend of the freedom of journalism. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this. The gentleman, yes, there in the back. You have the floor.
Many thanks. Valery Makeyev. I'm the secretary of the National Federation of Journalists in Ukraine. I didn't originally want to take the floor, but I heard 2 statements by Russian members of the Federation of Journalists. First of all, I'd like to express my thanks to all participants, also Sergei Gavrilenko. And we are also grateful for the solidarity that was shown by the Federation. we have some very interesting forms of interviews and examinations. There is a lady that was sitting in the corner, and she was searching for something. There were journalists from Russia, Ukraine, Poland, and we were in prison. We were then transferred to a different place. I don't know who is loyal to which kind of government, but I'd like to thank everybody who participated in my liberation. And I'd also like to point out, I don't know who of the colleagues said this, but there were comments, there was criticism with regard to this statement that was adopted by the Russian and Ukrainian federations of journalists on the education of Fadzeev, who went missing in Ukraine. If this two-day meeting would have had only one result, that is this statement, then it would already have been a success, because saving one life is very important. I don't know whether it will help him, but he's our colleague, he's our friend, and if such a joint statement would help, it would be just a new format, it would be an innovation. We have a very popular talk show in Ukraine. For example, in my prison cell, there came people who said, just look at this show. And other colleagues from Krasnodarsk also mentioned here the role of mass media in a conflict zone. And I don't agree with them that they don't have a role, because I think the role of media is very important, is very significant, especially in conflict zones. I think when I was in prison, I was told, we keep you here to defend you, because if you were to get out, you would be torn to pieces, because you, the journalists, also contribute to this war. So we heard this kind of statement, this kind of phrase. The responsibility on our side is very significant. Please give me another 2 seconds. As far as imprisonment is concerned, we heard that there was a proposal to exchange prisoners, but only if we would promise to show an objective picture of the situation. So also our TV was supposed to show the true picture. Thank you.
Which brings us back with our feet on the ground. We're not here to settle political problems. We're here to speak about the safety and the freedom of journalists to work. You have the floor.
Many thanks. First of all, I'd like to mention that I very much regret that so much attention has been placed on the personal stories of journalists. I think it would be more important to speak about global issues, but it has turned out that the fate of each and every individual is important. I live in Crimea, and I have to answer. 3 generations of my family have been living in Crimea. The graves of my family and of my 5-year-old son are still in Kerch. I'm not able to travel there. I don't have a single relative there. So we are unable to get back to our home country. It's a great honor for me to work for Radio Liberty, but I would much rather work in my home country, in my home city. I don't want to leave and go anywhere. Of course, we also can speak a lot about code of morals, code of ethics, ethical behavior for journalism. But when you live in a world where you're surrounded by propaganda, by Stalinist repression, and I'm talking about Crimea, then where the level of education is very low, where the older generation has been deprived of the possibility to speak and think critically, whereas fake news are constantly being spread. At the beginning of this conference, we heard about the working conditions of journalists in a conflict zone, but I'd like to point out that we are confronted with a completely new form of war. It's a hybrid war, and this is not a myth. It's a true challenge that the world community is confronted with, and we have to react to it in a more flexible way. I call on my colleagues to come to conferences and events that are being organized by Crimean journalists after 5 o'clock. You will hear the true story. If you're interested, please come to our side event. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You have the floor, sir.
Антон Стуликов.
Anton Stolikov, TV from Sverdlovsk area. I also represent the Russian Federation of Journalists. There is a saying that two wise men can always agree if they agree on the terminology. When we're talking about fake news here, it is a problem of definition of terminology. Fake, for me, always means internet, a fake site, a fake account, for example. And if we accept that fake news is a category of news that is that emanates from a fake site and a fake account, the story becomes much more understandable. I think we should instead use the term spread of false information. Where does all this come from? Because the professional standards of journalists are not being adhered to. In the case of fact-checking, if the facts of both sides are being checked, then there can be no fake news in the traditional sense, in traditional media. At the same time, a very significant problem is posed by the fact that a high-ranking representatives gives an irresponsible statement that is then being spread in mass media. For example, our British colleague said that the Russian media has not been reporting about opposition marches, which is not true, because in Yekaterinburg, my city, marches of demonstrations by the opposition have been shown on TV, on Channel 1 and 2. Thank you.
Вот вам фейковая новость.
Well, that's fake news for you.
But I'm glad you said Sverdlovsk, because that's how I grew up. Thank you very much. There are some hands I did not see. I'm pretty sure of that. Over there at the end, and the gentleman over there. First you, over there at the end of the table. I'm sorry not to be able to be more precise. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Я задам вопрос по-русски.
I would like to ask a question in Russian. I'm Dmitry Knap. I'm an investigative journalist from Ukraine. And I'd like to express my gratitude to Mr. Gorbachev from the Russian delegation, who presented his collection of photos of the so-called Russian Spring in Crimea. Mr. Gorbachev went through the slides very quickly. That's why I wasn't able to see everything. And I'd like to ask a question. Did you also cover the events on Crimea regarding Mr. Akhmetov, a Crimean Tatar who was tortured and practically died from torture in 2014 when the peninsula was taken by the Russian armed forces? Do you have photos of Crimean Tatars from that time who are now imprisoned in Crimea, who have been accused of extremism or of being a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir? And I'd also like to clarify, for example, I myself cannot explain to my colleagues what the difference is between you and me. As an author of an investigation on offshore assets of Mr. Poroshenko. I'd like to ask you if Mr. Timchenko, Rotenberg, Jamalova, and many other close friends of Mr. Putin who have become fantastically rich during his time in power are also in this investigation. Thank you.
These direct questions to colleagues, I suggest you settle them after the meeting. Otherwise, we will have discussions between many of you on many issues which are unavoidably politically loaded in a certain sense. So I would prefer you have this after this session, if you don't mind. Although, I mean, you may think that the question was pertinent, and I think the colleague will also think that he has an answer, but let's do that outside of this one. Are there any more questions or more remarks from NGO, media, civil society side? You over there. Yes, sir. You have, and over there also, later.
Спасибо.
Thank you. Andrei Postonets, Belarusian Association of Journalists. At this conference, we've been speaking about important questions of responsibility by the community of journalists for the spread of fake news and for adhering and complying with ethical standards of journalists. And we also mentioned the role of the state in promoting such a climate of disinformation. And on the other hand, we've also discussed punitive measures against journalists who spreads the wrong information, so to speak, or information which the representatives of the government do not like. The colleague from Kazakhstan today told us about new articles in the criminal law of Kazakhstan, which might be used to exert pressure on journalists. In Belarus, we are confronted with the same situation. Last year, 4 criminal cases were initiated for incitement to nationalist hate. 3 journalists, editorialists of the Russian side, Revin, are still imprisoned for more than 6 months. And although their position is very far removed from my point of view, for example, that Belarusian language is not a true language, I think that this stance that has been adopted by our state is not in compliance with international standards in the area of freedom of speech. And this goes to show that the influence of the state is very important, and that's why the role of the OSCE representative on freedom of the media must be reinforced, which has been blocked recently. And that's why I'd like to join the appeal to make an appointment very soon. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Gentlemen, over there. Yes, please. You.
My name is Yuri Lukanov, journalist from Ukraine. We have now we have a Dunya's office, office без Дуни, but I'd like to ask, I'd like to remind you that Dunya is a very bold person. She was in Crimea during the annexation. She met with Ukrainian journalists and supported them. And despite of the hotel in which this meeting took place, it was crowded by a very aggressive crowd. But anyway, she did it. And I think that she did a lot in order to protect journalists. And I'd like to ask her office to say her hello, because she has resigned, unfortunately. And thank you, and send thank you from all Ukrainian journalists, at least participants of this conference. And also, I would like, I think that soon we will have new chief of the office. And I'd like to ask the staff to retail new head of the office, future head of the office, to describe the idea of Duny to create a mission to Crimea, because, you know, we have discussion when Russian journalists or representative of Russian Union of Journalists saying that everything is okay in Crimea, but Ukrainians saying that everything is wrong in Crimea, and probably how to solve this problem. Maybe we should check. We should create international mission which would go there, which would have and free access to Crimea and check it. But now we, as far as I know, Russian government blocked free access for the mission. That's why this idea was shut down. And also, sorry, I will a little bit add. Now at 4 o'clock on the 5th floor, we will have a side event about crime in Crimea against media, and I invite everybody to participate. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this. We turn to the gentleman to the right here.
Bogdanov, the chairperson of the Association of Journalists in Russia. I've been working in the Federation for a long time. Before that, I worked at a newspaper with 7 million copies being circulated. And I've also been working on TV. Due to my long-standing experience, I need to note that the community of journalism now experiences defeat, because we are now confronted with the victory of globalization, the victory of political technology, of PR, of all types of propaganda, of information war. Even at today's session, which I really liked, but even the previous sessions were very interesting, I need to state that we experienced information war that went on in this very room between two sides, as if the main task of journalists were to be a fighter. What is a journalist fighter? I always thought that journalists were the ears and eyes of society. I don't think that a journalist should be blind. A journalist should look at truth, should look at the truth of humanity, of society, should help their society to get to grips with the facts. It is very difficult for me to acknowledge this fact that our situation, our profession is in very dire straits. Our profession has become unreliable. Nobody believes journalists. We have now journalists who are liars. They work for PR. A woman has once approached me who asked me about freedom of speech. She promotes a portal for a company. This woman told me that I only have freedom of decision. If I take the right decision, I'm being paid. I get 10 million rubles per month. And that is business. I defend business. I almost fainted. How could it be that our profession has reached those kinds of limits? We are now confronted with a state of profound distrust. I'm very grateful for this work that is being done by the OSCE. I hope that you are going to be our partner in future. We are going to hold an international summit on trust, on confidence. How can journalism win back trust in the eyes of the international community? We need to take additional efforts. On October 25th, we are going to open a conference in Dragamys, which is going to take place for an entire week. And even if Ukrainians are against it, I'm going to travel to Dragamys. I hope you are all going to come and talk about journalism. Thank you to the OSCE once again.
Thank you very much for this statement. I think, we all think, it's time for delegations and their right of reply. And the first, of course, is the Russian Federation, who has been waiting so patiently. Yes, please. Or are you a delegation lady? Yes? Okay, good. I'll take your floor. Yeah. Please. Russian Federation.
Thank you, Chairperson. I will be very brief. Of course, I'm not surprised, rather disappointed by the fact that this conference yesterday and today was anti-Russian. I heard an entire parade of unfounded propaganda accusations and manifestos by our Ukrainian colleagues on the part of the Ukrainian MFA, but also on the part of the Ukrainian journalists, which I was very surprised about. Of course, this type of interventions has distracted us from the topic, which should have been discussed in a more extensive way. What could we have talked about? We could have talked about the fact that at present a new information reality has been established, a new sovereign state also is entitled to get empowered in the area of information technology, and Russia defends its right. Yes, those points of view are not always in accordance with the traditional views in Brussels or Washington, but this is the new reality that we have to come to terms with sooner or later. It was very interesting to hear about fake news, because your humble servant also participated in the United Nations and in the corresponding committee in an attempt to define fake news. And I think we need to be based on serious research. We need to describe this phenomenon. We need to. We still don't have a common agenda regarding the term fake news. Russia, in spite of the political disposition of several partners, has and will try to cooperate with other countries in this area. Fake news is probably has probably been first mentioned by Donald Trump when he had to deal with American news. Nobody mentioned this, that there have been massive false allegations directed at the White House. This would also have been an interesting topic for discussion, but maybe for the next time. I think that the discussions of the last 2 days have been useful, and I'm very grateful to the organizers. But we have to focus on more constructive issues, on common threats to the information landscape, and we should refrain from political propaganda. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this. The gentleman to your right, indeed, you came to me to ask the floor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Karen Kostandian. I'm from the Permanent Mission of Armenia to the OSCE. In the interest of time, I will shorten my intervention. The full text will be distributed later. I would like to thank the Office of the OSCE Representative on Freedom of the Media and the Austrian Chairmanship for organizing the Conference on Freedom of the Media in Volatile Environments. Our thanks go to the distinguished speakers for sharing their conceptual approaches and own practical experience of activities in volatile environments, including conflict and crisis situations, internal armed conflicts, and political instability. The delegation of Armenia, in its contribution to the discussions, drew attention to the dangerous trend of exporting censorship and restrictive practice by some participating states beyond their jurisdiction. Not accidentally, such measures are taken by those participating states which already have effectively abolished freedom of the media in their own countries through a wide range of repressions against journalists and bloggers, and are now trying to export their ill practices elsewhere. We highlighted such challenges as kidnapping and enforced disappearances, harassment, intimidation, and detention of journalists who dare to disagree with the official narrative of governments while covering sensitive topics, as well as instrumentalizing family members to impose pressure on journalists. These attempts should not go unnoticed and thus create dangerous precedents for freedom of expression throughout the entire OSCE area. And in this respect, we share the concerns raised at the OSCE Permanent Council, as well as by the RFOM and the ODIHR on the specific cases of Alexander Lapshin and Afgan Mukhtarli. We were pleased to note that the position of the Armenian delegation was widely shared by other participants, while attempts to justify restrictive practices and in compliance with international human rights standards under the pretext of state security and countering terrorism were marginalized. Criminalization and other impediments for journalists and bloggers to visit conflict areas is another worrying sign that those who resort to it are willing to hide or perpetrate new mass atrocities. It is well known from the history of mass atrocities that perpetrators always try to limit the information flow and freedom of movement in order to hide their ongoing and planned crimes. Finally, we would like to stress that the primary value of events organized within the OSCE is the opportunity to engage in constructive dialogue. We understand that the delegation of Azerbaijan has certain doubts about the validity and legitimacy of its points, when instead of raising them here, it prefers to simply distribute them through the OSCE distribution network. We are not going to comment all those points, since they were not raised during the conference and have no relevance for the topic. However, we thank the Azerbaijan delegation for sincerely presenting their restrictive practices. At this stage, we would simply like to draw attention to the Azerbaijani delegation that, according to a number of well-known human rights organizations, Republic of Artsakh holds much higher place in the media freedom ranking than Azerbaijan.
Sir.
So we would encourage the Azerbaijani authorities to make use of the best practices of the government of Artsakh. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much. You were a bit over time, I'm afraid. Kazakhstan, please.
Mr. Moderator, thank you very much for not forgetting me.
By the way, let's keep it short from now on, because really the translators have to go. The interpreters did a great job here, tirelessly, but they have a point where they stop working, you know?
I got your point.
Yeah.
Thanks. My name is Mireya. As I told, I'm representing Kazakhstan. First of all, I would like to thank organizers for convening this important meeting. As a delegation of Kazakhstan, we highly value the professional journalists' work here. And I would like to react to the statement made by Mr. Sviridov Andrei on several cases of Kazakhstani journalists. At the time being, investigations are going on the mentioned cases by him. And before that investigations end, it's, I think, early to make certain judgments on that issue. And I would like to inform participants that in certain cases, the journalists were kind of accused and the facts were already proven about the financial embezzlement and other so-called in Russian machinatsas. And here in a permanent council in Hofburg, we frequently, as a delegation of Kazakhstan, inform about updates on cases in Kazakhstan Permanent Council and the Office of the Representative of the Freedom of Media. I thank you.
And thank you for your conciseness. Georgia.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the Office of the Representative of Freedom of Media and the Chairmanship for organizing of this conference. As Georgia was mentioned with regard to the case of Azerbaijani journalist Afgan Mukhtarli, I would like to make a few remarks regarding this issue. Georgia has worked through a tough road to become a democratic state, aspiring to join European and Euro-Atlantic institutions, sharing their values, upholding the rule of law and protecting human rights. We made a great progress on the way to achieving these goals and will spare no efforts to protect the rights of every individual, regardless of their citizenship or political affiliation. An investigation on the case of Azerbaijani citizen Afgan Mukhtarli has been launched, and it serves our state's interest to ensure maximum transparency. It's our primary task to make sure that every question is answered in the shortest period of time. While commenting on the case of Afgan Mukhtarli, the Prime Minister called upon to avoid early conclusions until the investigation is underway and stressed that involvement of our state institutions in this case is absolutely ruled out. In conclusion, I would like to underline that our law enforcement agencies maintain active communication with both international organizations and the diplomatic corps and stand ready to open cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Azerbaijan, and then we will turn to the final remarks of Frane Marajovic, who will close this conference.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't promise to limit my time to the 2 minutes because too many accusations have been raised toward my country here. I would like to say that these accusations based on discriminative and one-sided approach, and would like to stress that no one in Azerbaijan are imprisoned due to their journalistic activity. All these mentioned cases are based on the court decisions, and those interested delegates can find them through the online and read them. Concerning to the case of Afgan Muhtarlı, State Border Service and Prosecutor General's Office of Azerbaijan thoroughly explained the reasons for this person's arrest in their joint statement on 1st June 2017, which are available online, and I would encourage all those interested to access and study them. Coming to the issue of freedom of media and journalists in Azerbaijan, I would like to stress that we have more than 5,000 media outlets affiliated with a wide range of political and public bodies and private organizations, and 40 daily and more than 200 weekly and newspapers disseminated, and Azerbaijan state, in accordance with all national legislations and international commitments and law, are providing the freedom of expression and safety of journalists. Coming to the accusations of Armenian delegation toward Azerbaijan, it is not a new thing toward us, and we are used to hear the accusations from these delegations, regardless of the topic of the conference. Coming to the distributed statements, I would like to remind Armenian delegations that we had these statements during the yesterday's opening session and Session 3, or accreditation of journalists to the conflict zones. And regarding the Alexander Lapshin and Afgan Muhtarlı case, I would like to stress that these two cases has nothing to do with the Armenian government, and they are discussed between the Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Belarus. So it's another evidence of Armenian delegation to encourage the journalists to go to the territories which are result of the occupation and result of the flagrant violations of international law. And in general, let me comment on the spirit of this conference. The topic of conference was the media freedom in violent in the violent environment, I mean, in the conflicts, and we would like to stress that the issues such as the professionalism of journalists and adherence to ethical standards and their adherence to the international law and national legislation would be more welcome to discuss within this conference rather than one-sided political accusations. Thank you.
In the next debate, we will have you in a more quiet way. I'll give you the floor as a first speaker so that you have the time to express yourself properly and not feel this hurry. US, I'm sorry, some others. I have a question to the interpreters. Do we still have 5 minutes? Or what is it? How far are we?
Yes, you do.
That is very kind of you. US.
Thank you very much.
And Ukraine after that.
I'll do my best to be as swift as you are gracious. The State Department and Radio Liberty were raised, and so I just had a couple of brief comments. The U.S. government is proud of our overseas broadcasting. We're open and transparent about it. The independence of its newsrooms and its commitment to journalistic standards have historically been recognized as among its greatest sources of strength. It was also implied that the U.S. is somehow satisfied with the media freedom conditions in Crimea. I'll address that in a few moments. But first, I just wanted to thank the Office of the RFOM for organizing the conference. You assembled an excellent slate of panelists with deep knowledge and expertise that can help inform our work both within and beyond the OSCE. As a number of participants have already reflected, the United States was also disappointed but not surprised that instead of acting in good faith and using this conference for its intended purpose, certain participating states instead sought to stack the room with surrogates and proxies, presumably to crowd out other voices and deny the opportunity for meaningful dialogue. Instead of allowing a vibrant conversation to go forward on how the OSCE, RFOM, and participating states can address real pressing media freedom challenges, these states attempted to abuse this forum, to sow seeds of doubt, and to deny, deceive, and confuse, often through lengthy prepared political statements that were unrelated or only at best tangentially related to the topic at hand. Often, these statements were being made by the very individuals calling for balance, dialogue, and impartiality. This is disingenuous and disrespectful, especially to the many participants who traveled a long way to be here to participate in a good faith, genuine dialogue. As we leave today, it's critically important that we not lose sight of the facts, especially with respect to the status of freedom of expression and media in volatile environments, particularly with respect to Russian-occupied Crimea. It's a fact that Russia has illegally occupied the sovereign territory of its neighbor, Ukraine. It's a fact that individuals peacefully expressing their opposition against the occupation have faced harassment, kidnapping, disappearance, forced psychiatric hospitalization, and politically motivated prosecution. It's a fact that independent media and civil society have been silenced and have nearly disappeared from the peninsula. And it's also a fact accepted by the international community as reaffirmed in UN General Assembly Resolution 68262 that Crimea was, is, and will remain an integral part of the sovereign territory of Ukraine. In conclusion, as participating states, we all have an obligation to ensure that these fora remain useful, constructive platforms for meaningful good faith dialogue with a broad cross-section of independent voices from media and civil society. We should all leave here clear-eyed about what we've seen over the last 2 days so that we can work together to ensure that these fora remain vibrant spaces for sharing a plurality of views that can inform our work as states and as an organization. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Some delegations may feel the need to give each other rights of reply after this debate.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I will try to be very brief. I will exercise our right to reply on behalf of the delegation of Ukraine. First, there would have been no confrontation, of course, in this hall while discussing such an important topic as fake news, propaganda, and media freedom in volatile environments if it were no war. Russia waged a war against Ukraine, ongoing war. People are dying every day in Ukraine. People are being killed and wounded in Ukraine on a daily basis. First. Second, information warfare is being waged by Russian Federation, and Russia uses information as a powerful weapon. This weapon, which is waged by Russia, kills people. It incites hatred, violence. It leads to a deterioration situation. There is no media freedom in occupied Crimea and in occupied Donbass. There are no Ukrainian and Crimean Tatar outlets, neither in Crimea nor in Donbass. And third, again, the Russian Federation uses fake NGOs and gongos, and there is an example of the Sevastopol organization which to promote and to justify its aggression against Ukraine. And we would like to raise the point of order how such organizations which represent occupying authorities are being represented here in this hall. The Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol are integral part of Ukraine, illegally occupied by the Russian Federation, and this has been endorsed by the UN resolution, General Assembly resolutions in 2014, in March 2014, and in December 2016. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and thank you for the conference.
Thank you very much for this. Frane Marojevic has the floor.
Thank you, Tai. Shall I put the timer on for myself as well? First of all, thank you, all of you, for your active participation over the last 2 days. The fact that so many of you are still here and attended both days of the conference is a testimony to the importance of this topic. I think, just to underline again, one of the major things that we had at this conference was this important agreement between the heads of the National Union of Journalists in Ukraine and Russian unions of journalists, who issued a joint appeal expressing concern and calling for an investigation into the disappearance of a freelance journalist, Stanislav Aseev, in Donetsk. And therefore, I would like to thank to Mr. Tomilenko and Mr. Bogdanov for this important reminder about the safety of journalists and real concrete steps to ensure safety of journalists on the ground. We had an excellent and stimulating start to this conference already yesterday with an impressive introduction by Ambassador Rowning outlining the support of the OSCE chairmanship to media freedom. Then, of course, we had Kate Adie's very memorable speech drawing on her wide experience as a journalist. She deplored the distance we often see between official statements on freedom and realities on the ground, and she made a passionate plea for need to support freedom and independence of the media and calling on governments not to manipulate the public with fake news. David Kay, the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression, again stressed that the freedom of expression in the OSCE region is struck by volatility. He stressed the need to strengthen the legal framework by securing our rights to freedom of experience and expression, but even excellent laws are dependent on implementation and compliance. And he pointed out to the decrease in public support for media freedom and cynicism of some political leaders. We had fantastic sessions, and I'm not going to now, due to the constraints of time, give assessment on the sessions, but I would like to thank all the speakers and moderators. So I would like to, of course, mention them by name: Barbara Bukovska from Article 19, David Mickelson from Snoops.com, Dainius Razdevicius from the Lithuanian Union of Journalists, Elena Sherstoboeva from the University in Moscow, Ashwin Raman, Oksana Gavriluk from Ukraine, Tapio Vares, Oksana Voloshenyuk, Marius Lukoshinas, George Krivokapic, Barbara Triumfi, Sergei Tomilenko, John Owen, Sasha Lekovic, Error Onderoglu, Barbara Thomas, Inga Sikoraskia, Diana Dudsk, and Bent Norby Bonde. And of course, I want to first of all thank our interpreters who have made our discussion and dialogue and debate possible in this multilingual environment. And I would like to very much express thank you to all the colleagues in the Office of the OSCE Representative on Freedom of the Media all around who have made this conference possible, who have worked for months in order to make all of us feel comfortable and welcome here today. Of course, this would not be possible without the support of the governments of Netherlands and Germany for providing the funding for this event. So I think all of you deserve a round of applause, and I invite you after this conference. There are still a number of side events that are taking place here which will discuss further issues of importance of today. So thank you all very much.
So now you can join the side events in other rooms of this venue. Thank you very much.